Hello, my name's Caity and welcome to Behind the Blinds, our series where we talk about all the finer details of all things shades and blinds. Today, we're going to talk about measuring. It may seem intimidating, but I promise if I can do it, you can too. You'll want to start with a steel measuring tape and something to record your measurements with. Also, be sure you're measuring the actual window opening itself and not the existing product that's there. As for the tape measure itself, let's talk about what all the lines mean. The most easily identifiable number or marker will be the big numbers or the inch marks. The next most easily identifiable marker is the half-inch mark in between the two larger numbers. Then in between the half-inch mark and the whole number marks, you'll see the quarter-inch markers of a quarter inch and 3/4 of an inch. Halfway in between the quarter-inch markers, you'll see eighth-inch markers. When measuring, you want to make sure that you are measuring down to the nearest eighth-inch marker. Before you begin any precise measuring, be sure to know what product you're interested in and if you're thinking you want to do either an inside mounted product or an outside mounted product. The instructions for how to measure and what dimensions to use will vary slightly depending on what product you're ordering and if you're doing an inside or outside mounted product. You will find these specific measuring instructions at the bottom of each product page under the Measure and Install tab. The Specifications tab right next to the Measure and Install tab is also useful because it tells me things like the minimum amount of depth I would need for my product to be safely mounted inside of my window opening, the minimum amount of depth that I would need for my product to fit entirely within my window opening, also known as a flush mount, and the minimum amount of space that I would need above my window opening for an outside mounted product. For this example, I will first measure for an inside mounted product, and then I will measure for an outside mounted product. I will start by measuring the depth of my window opening. I will cross-reference that with the Specifications tab to make sure that I have at least the minimum inside mount depth requirement. If I want my product to fit entirely within my window opening or flush, I would want to make sure that I have at least the minimum inside mount flush depth requirement. I will then move to measure the width of my window opening. I will measure my width from left to right in 3 separate places. I will measure at the very top, in the middle, and at the very bottom. I want to make sure I'm recording those dimensions down to the nearest eighth inch. If my width dimension is ending at one of those tiny lines in between the eighth inch markers, I would want to round down in this case. Please note that it is only necessary to round up or down if you are ending in between eighth inch markers. Once I have my 3 width measurements, I will order the smallest of the 3. Moving on to the height, I will again measure in 3 separate places and record those dimensions. I also want to make sure that my height dimension is recorded to the nearest eighth inch. I will measure on the very left-hand side, in the center, and on the right-hand side of my window opening. If my height measurement is ending in between those eighth inch markers, I will round up for my height. Once I have my 3 height dimensions, I will order the largest of the 3 height dimensions. Measuring is very similar for an outside mounted product. Instead of starting with a depth dimension, I will start with measuring the space that I have above the window opening. I will want to make sure that that space meets or exceeds the outside mount requirement that is specified in the Specifications tab. I will then begin to measure my 3 width and 3 height dimensions, just like I did before, and I will select the largest width and the largest height. If my dimension is ending in between those eighth inch markers, I would round up for both width and height. Then I'm not done. I need to add a little bit of dimension to the actual dimension of my window opening to make sure that my product is going to cover the entire space. I want to make sure I add at least the required height dimension that I referenced earlier, so that when I mount the product above the window opening, it is not too short. Traditionally, it's recommended to add 2 to 4 inches to both the width and the height of the actual window opening dimension, but honestly, that's really up to you. Add what works well for your space. And that's it. Measuring's not as complicated as it seems. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to help. Thanks for watching Behind the Blinds. My name's Caity. Have a great day.